The volume of unsold bike inventory is just a lot bigger than I think anyone had appreciated. I was in Taichung and I came away from there a little bit more depressed because there was just the volume of bikes is still quite dramatic. It is in pockets, it's not across every single bike, but inventory that was probably originally destined for the US now being sort of trying to rehome it somewhere because of the tariffs. We've still got a lot of bike inventory to get through, and that's going to probably take us well into 2026. People are still riding bicycles, and they haven't stopped riding bikes. We need shops to survive. It's so important to us, and that's what we've got to focus on, making sure that they not only survive but flourish.
Welcome to the brand new BikeBiz Podcast. I'm your host, Pedro Couto Lopes. You can find me hosting another podcast called Ride to Success. And on today's episode, we are joined by Dominic Langan, the CEO of Madison and one of the most experienced voices in the cycling industry, to unpack what 2025 really looked like from inside the trade and what it means for you in 2026. This episode is sponsored by Reed Bikes, now distributed in the UK by Windwave. Reed is on a mission to make cycling and e-mobility accessible to all through affordable bikes and e-bikes. So go and check them out, find out more at reedbikes.com. There will be a link on the show notes. So what's in it for you in this brand new episode of BikeBiz Podcast? If you are a retailer, brand, distributor, or industry professional wondering why some businesses quietly found momentum while others continue to struggle, how changing consumer behavior is reshaping the role of bike shops, or even where the real opportunities lie as the market stabilizes. This conversation is for you. So stay with us, because by the end of this episode, you'll hear how Dom's practical advice on what the industry needs to stop doing and what it needs to start doing will affect you in 2026. So stay with us and make sure to follow BikeBiz Podcast wherever you listen. Now, let's get into this conversation. Dom, welcome. You have been in the cycling industry for over 30 years. And the bike industry has been through extraordinary highs, but equally testing lows. As we start this conversation, I wanted you to paint us a picture of what was the mood of the industry heading into 2025.
Yeah, I'd say at the beginning of the year, we had our trade show Ice Bike in February, and the mood actually was incredibly positive, and I was quite concerned thinking it's going to be a bit more miserable, but actually it was very upbeat, and we actually had more people attend this Ice Bike than we had any of the previous ones, which was really encouraging to see. And I think it kind of set the mood music that people were definitely wanting to sort of move forward, and we're going into the season in a positive outlook. And I think that sort of throughout the year, though, that has subsequently sort of, there's been ups and downs, I'd say, through the year. I think people were positive, but there's been other factors, I think, that have also impacted the year. But, on the whole, the year we hadn't panned out as well as I would have liked, but equally, it certainly hasn't turned out as bad as I have feared that it could have done. So it's kind of...
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because I wanted to touch on that as well. In 2024, the closing of the year, some people were saying survive until 25. And it was very much more like, brace yourselves, we're going to get to 2025 and we're going to get over this. And yet, as you described it, it was not quite as, smooth sailing. So how did the mood kind of shift as the year, 2025 unfolded?
I think that there's our industry sort of, our industry created issues. I think, the volume of bikes, unsold bike inventory is just a lot bigger than I think anyone had appreciated, and even myself. And I have to say, I was in Taichung at the Taichung Bike Week, and I came away from there a little bit more depressed because there was just the volume of bikes is still quite dramatic. It is in pockets, it's not across every single bike, but there is still a huge amount of inventory. I think some of those factors are probably also linked to inventory that was probably originally destined for the US now being sort of trying to rehome it somewhere because of the tariffs. So I came away from that thinking, oh my God, we're still going to see, we've still got a lot of bike inventory to get through, and that's going to probably take us well into 2026 as well, which I came away a little bit depressed by that thought. And also, having visited a few factories, they were still way off anywhere near their production capacities. So I think it's clearly still very challenged out there. But I think just the volume of bikes that were produced during COVID and for the period afterwards was as people tried to sort of slam the reverse gear in, but carried on producing. But it just was on a huge scale. I think more than most of us appreciated. But
say that there is clear some strain still in the industry, and but at the same time there is glimmers of hope. You've spoken about businesses quietly doing well. Wanted to kind of expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think there are people that have realised that they've got to change a little bit and or start thinking differently. And I think there are definitely shops that have really changed or rethought about how they do things, and those people seem to be doing pretty well. And actually, I'd say in things like parts and accessories, then the stock situation is very much back to normal. Lead times are very much back to normal. It's probably bike sales is the more challenging. The people are still selling bikes, but the money they're making on them, from the suppliers and also through the retailers, that's a bit more challenging. But I say on the parts and accessories side, definitely a much more positive year. And I'd also say it's been a much more positive year in terms of the independent specialist retailers. They seem to be performing well and have been tracking way ahead of last year all through the year. Whereas I say some of the bigger customers or the bigger sort of corporate style customers, they're the ones that seem to have been a little bit slower to react to things or adapt their business model. They obviously take longer to do. They plan much further out ahead. So an IBD can react a bit quicker. And I think some have done that and looked at what they're doing and really thought about how they can change things up. Some have done that and some don't. It's always the way. But I think that there are definitely people that are bucking the trend. And, I see it all the time in my sales guys do visit reports, and it's really telling that even in the same town where they could be visiting one or two retailers, you've got one who's doing really well and the other one is just saying it's dead, there's no one coming in, and yet you're in the same town, so you do wonder whether what's that down to sometimes. But I mean, there are obviously lots of business challenges at the moment, and some of those are sort of outside of our control. The cost of doing business it is more expensive to do business. I think some shops who have been operating, close to the edge have found that that's extra cost is a tipping point for them, really. And I think that's, it's been challenging for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that IBDs, like smaller companies, bike shops, they are more agile or not, but you have to be ready to change, and you need to be ready to adapt. And that's kind of one of the lines that has been present all throughout 2025, and also kind of touched back to an article that you wrote on BikeBiz earlier, later in 2025 about adapt or die, and kind of the realities of the business cycling industry and what needs to be done. And I wanted to kind of touch on that because staying the same has proven that is not working at the moment. Where do you see kind of the biggest structural changes the sector must face head on to
I think it's always been the problem that the industry has had, in a way that it tends to be run by most businesses are run by basically mechanics who happen to own a retail premises, and so retail is not necessarily their strongest point, and they're very technically brilliant, and we need them very much so, because without them, bikes will gradually grind to a halt, and that will be a problem. So, but I think the biggest issue is that they really need to up the game on retail and how they present their businesses and how they can encourage footfall. And that basically what my article was about before, that they often say, well, that's not my customer, but they have people walking past their shop all day long, and why don't those people walk into the shop? And what is it you're doing to try and attract? You may say it's not your customer, but why couldn't it be your customer? And actually,
Exactly.
what are they seeing when they walk past your shop? And I think the crux of that article was really, why don't you just stand on the other side of the street and just have a look at who's walking by? I think the other thing is every consumer, everyone that's walking, even the regular bike shop consumers are also going into all the other big high street chains, and those shops are well lit, well merchandised. Most cases are very logical sort of ranging in the store that makes it easy to make decisions about what to buy, attractive displays, and not always, but good staff, which is often a hard thing to get. And I think bike shops actually do have very knowledgeable staff, whereas a lot of shops don't. But I think in bike shops they really do. But it's about that. How do you really, every customer that comes to that door, how do you engage with them in a way that doesn't make them feel intimidated? And this is a big, a big issue around women coming into bike shops that
Yes,
they don't really
100%.
like,
Yeah.
because they don't feel comfortable in the environment, or the environment's not really being created to make them feel comfortable. So I think there's all these factors that, with not a lot of effort, but with some effort, we can definitely make a big difference. And that's why at Madison, we've, for a long time, have invested in product promoters that work alongside our sales guys to actually go into the stores and actually help with visual layout. We do a lot of custom graphics. We do training, product training, all these things. And it's what we've always done at Madison for a very, very long time. It's just to try and help them be a better retailer. They're great at mechanicking, and we've got things like Shimano service centers, which is all brilliant. But actually, how do we also make that shop pay for itself rather than just the workshop carrying the rest of the business? And that's really, what we've tried to do. And obviously, some shops do this fantastically well, and others less so. And I think it's just trying to up that, really up the game in the stores. And that's why we do a lot of training and events. Even at Ice Bike, there's a big focus on us on education and visual merchandising, and just generally thinking about what you put into the shop. I think that's probably one of my big bugbears. It's just the ranging. Needs some more thought.
I mean, it's interesting because they clearly there's a lot of passion in the industry. There is, as you said, people opening bike shops because it's kind of part of their hobby. They train, they want to open a business, and yet there's sometimes this skills lacking that to attract a wider audience and to kind of refresh displays, etc., etc. And I wanted to kind of to touch on that because as part of your as Madison, how does that play a vital part in helping these small bike shops, because they need the training, they need some kind of guidance, and yet the customer, us, we are constantly changing. Our habits are changing. We are looking at brands, in the high street, and they're constantly adapting. Marketing is ever evolving. How does a one person kind of running an independent bike shop can still be relevant in today's kind of overwhelming bombardment of messages, social media, etc.
It's tough. I mean, they haven't got unlimited resources either, and I fully appreciate it, which is why we try to help them achieve these things and encourage them. But our sort of stance on it is, if it's all very well I can sell a product into a shop, but if it doesn't sell through, then that will be the one time I get an order and I won't be getting anything else. So it's really, from a sales point of view, the better they are at selling, the more likely they're going to reorder stuff, and so that's the angle. But which is why we want to focus on it. But I think they need to really, I think it's looking at their area. Obviously, each area is slightly different. There's a lot of geographic, even in the UK, there are quite significant geographical sort of differences of the riding and so on, and the type of bikes that sell, and the demographic they want to target. But I think it's about just trying to, I think it's being true to what you actually are passionate about, and doing that properly. But I think they actually probably do a little bit too much in some ways, and actually if they did a bit less, they could do it much better. So there is and I think, and this is where it sort of comes back to the ranging, that they, when you go into a bike shop, you often just find there's not really massive amount of logic to why certain things are on the wall. And also and a lot of that comes down to the fact that we do have far too many brands in the industry, full stop. We have too many brands, probably not enough customers, and too many probably too many retailers and other places where you can buy product from. So there is a need a little bit for some sort of thinning out of product, but the problem is it's quite a low entry barrier for people to bring products into the cycle market. So it's a relatively low entry point, but then they fail because actually, they just don't have that scale. And then those products have to be cleared. And then bike shops looking for a bit of a bargain will think, well, I'll take some of those and I'll do a bit of that. But all that really does is just you might make some money on that, but actually what it is doing is making your shop look a bit of a mess. And then
more cluttered, disorganized. Yeah.
and I always sort of think it looks like a lot of shops, the displays on the walls look like they just had a blunderbuss of bicycle parts fired at the wall in some random way. And it's like, and a consumer's got to come in and go, I just want a saddle. Where do I start? Well, I've got 15 brands of saddles and they're all the same price. And they probably all actually came from the same factory in nearly all the cases as well. So it's trying to, so from a consumer's point of view, they look at it, think it's all a bit overwhelming because it's not curated. And I think, and then the money's tied up in that stock. And also the other thing is that a lot of bike shops aren't very good at promotional calendars, or they don't like to do a sale. We've just had Black Friday, and there was a thread in one of our trade forums in the UK that just moaned about Black Friday, don't believe in it, don't want to do it, which is fine. But your high morals, those customers are still going to buy something, but they're just going to buy it somewhere else, and actually you've got a load of stuff in your shop that if I was you, I would actually have on a Black Friday offer and just clear. You need to get rid of some of this stuff and actually relook at what you're holding, what really is selling for you. And over the years, one of my roles at Madison in the past was I looked after all retail services and I installed EPOS systems into shops and helped train on stock control. I did that for a long time, 30 odd years ago. It still hasn't really massively changed how, they might have an EPOS system, but how are they actually using data and actually using that to influence what they buy and what not to buy. And I think the other thing I'd just say on that, how a shop should also look to adapt, is so many shops are basically run on the owner's personal preference rather than what the consumer actually wants. And I think,
it's critical. Yeah.
Your personal what you like, you might be, and we have quite a lot of characters in our industry. And I think, it could be, the little quirky at times. So actually worry less about your personal preferences. And we talk about this at Madison all the time when we're looking at ranging and when we have our new clothing lines come in and we all sit in there, all our opinions about, I don't like that color, don't like this. I don't really massively care. Our consumer, what colors are they wanting? At the end of the day, am I going to wear that color? Maybe not. But that mountain biker who's going to spend that type of money probably is interested in, and that's kind of, and I think a lot of shops are quite guilty of thinking, well, I don't agree with that. I don't, even things recently about, electric pumps. Why do you need an electric pump? Why do you, there's all these sort of arguments, but consumers want it, and
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It sounds like an industry like still clinging to the past, like the old ways of doing things. And, clearly the consumer now, it has always been king, but needs more attention. And like,
I think
some of the things you touched on is like, it needs to shift us forward.
Just really think about and this is what I've tried to get across, just thinking about what does that customer see when they walk into your shop, and, how easy is it for them to really just navigate through and see, and even if it is just as simple as good, better, best, these are the 3 saddles that I do in this sort of product category. These are the ones that, and those consumers are actually looking for that technical advice from the retailer. They may be coming in with not an opinion. The people that have opinions may be shopping around and all sorts, but the people that actually come into the shop actually want to have your input and advice. And I think that's the other thing, that a lot of especially specialists, the IBDs, really don't fully appreciate how important their knowledge is and how influential they are over what the consumer ultimately walks out with. I think they spend a lot of time worrying about what's on the internet and everything, but actually, the consumer also values what their recommendation and their local knowledge and and understanding. If you're going to use it for this sort of thing around here, I would recommend these tires or this or whatever. And I
Exactly.
think that has a huge value, and I think they often underestimate their own value as well, which
I mean, there's also important point to touch on here is that, and then this has been on the news recently. For instance, in London, in the capital, cycling insurance have increased by 43% over the past 6 years to 1.5 million a day, according to Transport for London. And this plays a huge part in growing the pie. If we are all targeting the same type of customer, we're all fighting for the same one person. Also, there's a kind of a narrative here of what can we do as well to open the doors for a wider population, the people, the 90% or more even, that are not thinking of bikes for in a kind of a sport or enthusiastic level, but also just to move from A to B, thinking of a safer way to commute or a better way to get fit. And there's also an important role in the kind of in small bike shops that need to be more inclusive, that need to be more open. You touched upon about the kind of the fact that making the bike shops more inclusive to women, making them feel welcome. That's a great point, and that's where many women will say perhaps that's a key thing that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think there are definitely shops that have done that, and but I think there's just a lot more opportunity for more of that. I think I was in a shop in Northern Ireland quite recently, and he's actually setting up a whole extra part. I mean, luckily he's got a lot of space, and he's going to create like a whole clothing zone. He also does running stuff as well, so a whole clothing zone with staff specifically trained up on clothing, because he said, him and his son, he goes, we're mechanics, like when it comes to talking fabrics and all that, and the technical aspects of the clothing, we're not very good at that, and we actually need people in that really do understand that. So he was actually creating a whole different zone, proper changing rooms, nice, all nicely merchandised. He does a really good job, but he recognised that he's not the person to actually have those conversations with consumers, and actually it'd be better if someone else came in to do that. So I think there are shops that are really doing that quite well, but I think there are a lot of shops that are quite set in how they want to do things, and I think it's also a bit of a symptom of the challenging market, that there's a lot of resistance to anything new, so it is quite challenging to try and get them to do something else, because it's a risk, and then right now they don't want to take a risk, and that's understandable. But I think the other risk, though, is by not doing something, or not thinking, well, maybe I should actually try this a bit differently. And, maybe I look at people walking past, I see the bikes that are riding by, and they're not my customer. And I think even when we have conversations like with clothing, they go, I don't do clothing. But if you don't do, you can do a very cut down, very simple range of basic items of clothing, especially if you take like the London numbers you just said. The big worry there is these guys that are doing all these journeys every day, and it's huge, but they're not doing it on their own bike, but they still want a helmet, they probably still want a waterproof jacket, maybe over trousers. At this time of year they probably do want a waterproof backpack or something that they can carry their stuff around in. And they're still, it's finding out, okay, certainly in central London, if they're not buying a brand new bike or buying any bike, because of, there's a few reasons why that is the case at the moment. Some of it is with e-bikes, especially, is down to
Exactly, the sharing,
not allowed to have them in your apartment, or nowhere to store them, or they're not allowed in their office building because of the sort of the bad PR around the sort of the dodgy e-bikes that with fires and on. So that is all play, and that's a big thing we've got to address as an industry, which we are trying to do. But because that's the new reality of ownership, storage, that it costs a lot to do these hire bikes, but in the mind of that consumer, they're thinking, I don't have to service it, I don't have to worry about where I leave it, I don't have to worry about the security and things for, the big negatives of why people don't cycle in the UK is the infrastructure, but in London and various other places, they have built it and people do use it. And then the other thing is about security and cycle theft, which, is a huge barrier. And there's lots of stats how once you've had a bike stolen once or twice, then a lot of people give up. So I think so there's loads of things you can get involved with, but that is the reality of where cycling seems to be going for that sort of non-enthusiast end. But we need to find a way of selling them something as well. So
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to kind of to touch on an aspect, which is like we've been talking a lot about how bike shops can adapt and improve, and I wanted to now to touch back on kind of the industry at large, because we see time and time again that when there is collaboration between whether it is distributors, brands, not to compete against each other, but to as what we've been talking about is growing the market, growing the potential for revenue. What is your view on kind of industry collaboration? Because, for instance, we've been talking about bringing new customers into bike shops, or just have bike shops reflect what the consumer wants. And I think there might be kind of an opportunity here for industry to come together and like, well, we can work together to solve these, to improve having more customers and kind of lobbying even governments to kind of improve infrastructure around our cities. So what's your view on that?
I mean, it's something. It's something that I have tried to do. And prior to COVID, a few years before COVID, we ran this program called the Partner Retail Program, where we basically funded the stock in the shop. So my frustration was that a lot of the time shops there was lost opportunities because they didn't have the stock in the shop at the time, and or it wasn't, or they didn't have the whole range. So it never, a big frustration for me is you got, we talk about our brands and we present it at shows like Ice Bike and other events, and you go, that's how it should look. And then you go into a bike shop and then there will be just an element of it or something. So it's never quite the way you'd like it to be portrayed. We don't expect them to do everything we do. That would just be mad. But, just doing something, properly with, sort of in depth on a brand. And so we thought, okay, the best way to do that is actually say, well, we'll fund the stock. And basically it's sat in my warehouse anyway. It might as well sit on the shelf in your shop, and if it sells, then you just replace it and buy the next one. And we did that, and we did that with a lot of retailers, and we had links up with their EPOS system. So the aim was that we would know what was being sold, and so we'd always know what inventory was in the shop. But unfortunately, it turned out that there was massive inaccuracies in the inventory in the shop reporting. And then when we sort of did audits every so as part of the process, the agreement in there, we were finding that the stock no longer was there. Then they couldn't afford to pay for it. And we're just into this whole situation where I was exposed for a lot of money. And in the end, we had to wind the program up, which is really frustrating because I think there were some things from our side that we probably should have been tighter on. As I guess there's some products where that in the market you'll only ever sell that many, and just because lots of shops have got them, you still only got an audience of that big. And so there were elements like that. But I think really frustratingly, it just it didn't work. And I think we are kind of re-looking at that again in a slightly sort of different version of it, because I think that is the future in a way. That is, the big problem. Margins in our industry aren't great. So that despite what consumers may write in forums, but they're always these sort of email warriors. But the actual reality is margins are pretty low, and especially on bikes, if they're also via the cycle scheme or you're doing it on finance, they've all got fees attached, and also they've got to fund that inventory in the store. I think there is definitely an opportunity for partnership where we work together, and sort of I want the presence on your shop floor. I would like you to do a minimum representation of this, but in return for that, I will fund that stock for a long period of time or whatever it may be. And I think there is definitely scope for that. But again, it's this sort of two-way street of trust and and working in partnership. And that bit, I think there still is a lot of sort of skepticism between sort of the retail and distributor side, which I find personally really a bit frustrating. And I don't think, certainly in our case,
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that happens? Why do you think that's kind of
because I think
that lack of trust is happening?
because sometimes, in distributors and retailers sometimes have to behave in a way that they probably don't want to, but due to financial pressures or short-term pressures, they take short-term moves, and that completely sort of unsettles the retailers. So, say they bought a load of bikes from a big distributor, and then suddenly they're clearing them themselves on their own website and undercutting the retailer. Obviously, that that relationship is somewhat then challenged.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure it's not necessarily criticism, but because I think sometimes retailers discount heavily and it's frustrating, and and it upsets lots of other people. But we don't know what necessarily their short-term pressures are. It could be that they've got a big bill, the rent or the VAT or whatever it may be,
Exactly. Yeah.
and these things kind of happen. But I think it's, again, this is all sort of stems back to just how many products there are and how many people are all fighting for this, the same piece of cake, really. And that's
Exactly. Yeah.
the bit. And I think retailers kind of need to really look at why they buy, what they're doing, and sometimes it is, I just really like this sales guy, that's why I buy from them or whatever. But it's like, those things also create the problems. And I think, also when it's a joint sort of, we talk about it quite a bit. There's a sort of a joint responsibility in a way when you shouldn't overbuy. I mean, I don't think anyone goes out their way to buy more than they can ever physically sell. I mean, I don't think any normal person does that. But the market, different after COVID, because no one knew exactly when it was going to drop away, and you'd be a brave man to say, I'm not ordering anymore, and then it could have carried on for another 2 years, and they would have shot themselves in the foot. So I think people have been quite critical, but I think it's I think there's lots of good reasons why people did what they did. But I think it's also the retailers had a responsibility in that, because they were placing orders with everyone, hoping, spreading everywhere. So basically, they only really wanted one bike, but they ordered one bike from 10 people. So everyone else thinks there was a demand for 10, and was only a demand for one. So and they all, so there is a sort of a two-way street, but ongoing. I think it's, if you want to do a brand and you don't want it all being discounted at the end of a season or at certain points, then collectively, if you all bought one or two each, you would deal with the problem, and you would retain the sort of the higher pricing that you want. But instead, it's like, I've gone here and bought something else because they did an offer, and I've left you with those bikes, even, and so I think it's all these sort of things. It's an ecosystem, and everyone's actions has a consequence, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Create ripple effects on the industry at large. Yeah. I wanted to kind of look ahead now into 2026 and kind of to the rest of the year. Because it's important now to kind of how we are shaping the future as a cycling industry. And I wanted to ask you, are you optimistic about 2026?
Definitely, I'm optimistic. But that means anything or not is another matter. I think, certainly from our point of view, it's a bit, people are still riding bicycles, and they haven't stopped riding bikes. And in fact, there may be a bit less in certain places than than before COVID, or and during COVID, obviously. But I think people still really enjoy riding bikes, and still it's an important part of their lives and their hobbies. So I think that will go on. I think people right now, the bigger problem for, I'd say, most people right now is the cost of living, and that is having an impact.
I mean, you mentioned the small wins and to kind of get us through 2026. What is for you the biggest opportunities for Madison, for retailers, brands at large?
Well, I just don't think there's going to be any sort of one big win that's suddenly going to come out of the woodwork. I think it is about...
There's not a silver bullet that's going to save us all.
I don't think there is. But I think there's I think it is all these sort of little changes that you have to do. We have to do as a business, like changing how we, some of our warehouse operations, constantly adapting our B2B platform to try and help retailers get a better experience from it. The stuff we do in store, all these things are all, who we work with, promoting the brands, and how we do our marketing. They're constantly changing, and I think that's basically what all the bike shops have to do. It's not going to be. I don't think we're suddenly going to see a boom in any particular category or anything like that. But I think it is those just being consistent and a focus on what you want to be and the best you can be, and really just say this is our market reality. How do we gain share? If the market's not growing but we want to grow, the only way you're going to do that is by taking market share. So how do we do that?
You have been in the industry for a long time, and you have seen a lot. I think one question that needs to be asked is if there was any advice you could give to the industry in 2026, what would it be?
Well, I think the reason why I've sort of stayed in the industry for so long is that it's actually a really nice industry to be in, and everyone's passionate about what they do. So there's no getting away from that. I think everyone has a passion for the industry, even when they're probably not making any money. They still would rather be doing that than anything else. And that it is one of the nice things, I guess, in a way, about our market, is that even with your competitors, you can still be friendly. It's not like a nasty cutthroat industry, but I think that's kind of what's nice about it. But equally, I think over those years, I mean, I've got a lot of customers that have, I've been at Madison for 36 years, and there's still a lot of customers that have been there the whole, and before I was there, there's still our customers. And I think the one thing I would always say, and I think, which is nice about our ownership, is that it's a very long-term industry. So that, so from my point of view, it's great. And he invests a lot in the business, allows us to invest in the things we want to do at a time when, as you say, you would be quite nervous, but I think we're confident about where we want to go, what we can achieve. But I think for me, the one bit of advice is, it's about running a very long-term strategy. And if you think you're going to come in and make a quick buck, and some people have over the years, and they haven't made a quick buck, they have come in, but they haven't done terribly well. So I think it's either an industry, that you come in and you do it for 6 months and just think, what the hell's that all about, and never want to come back, or you're in it for life, basically. And I think I'm sure that you just know people that have been in the industry all over the world, maybe in different roles around the place, but for life, basically. And I think that's the nice thing about it. It's a great industry to work in, but it has its challenges. But I think I've got friends who work in other industries, like in finance or whatever, and they're always miserable. They're not happy in it. Whereas I actually enjoy my job. Whereas I think they've always found that they enjoy riding bikes, but I actually really enjoy my job, and they hate their jobs and they can't wait to retire. So I think that's the real difference that our industry has, and I think it is down to how most people behave. It is pretty good and decent, and we all have a shared passion for cycling, and I think that is what holds it together. And we could definitely be doing better partnerships, and that's something that I think will happen in due course. I'm sure there'll be much closer collaborations between retailers and distributors, because I think that's what will have to happen.
You mentioned about the close relationships, and that's a human trait. We crave a human connection. You crave connections with our colleagues, our people that share the same hobbies, same passions, and that's how we connect. But it kind of is, in some way, professionalizing that, not losing the essence of the human connection, but also capitalizing on that into a level where we are taking business from a business perspective, knowing how to read a spreadsheet, knowing how to control our stock, knowing how to market it. And that's kind of the professionalism that, as we talked in the year, is that sometimes it lacks in bike shops. Right. Sometimes there's a role that we can all play as well into kind of elevating everyone, while still kind of not losing that kind of human connection.
Not easy to run a bike shop. I mean, and many years ago, we used to run a franchise called Freewheel. So we did franchise bike shops, and that's something I was involved in at Madison. And we basically provided turnkey bike shops. So there were people that were passionate about riding, maybe got made redundant, had money, wanted to open a bike shop. But it's like people that think they can run a pub or a restaurant better than the people that do run the restaurant. And when they get a bike shop, they go, oh, yeah, this is somewhat more challenging. And ended up being, that was another project we did over the years that became a bit of a challenge in the end because we ended up owning most of the shop. So as a consequence, but, it's not easy to run a bike shop at all, and it is hard work and it takes a lot of passion and a lot of, graft. And I think people don't quite appreciate that. But, and what we, I think from my point of view, all we want to do is just try and, we understand it, we recognize it, and we want to try and help you, because ultimately you probably got into a bike shop because you're passionate about cycling and probably, a good mechanic as well. But the rest of it, as you say, all the other things that go with that are the extra complicated bits. Yeah. So it's
exactly, for sure.
So yeah,
I wanted to now like bring the conversation to a close, because like we there's a lot of great insights here about the possibilities, the opportunities, obviously, that kind of we are hoping to achieve in 2026. Obviously, that comes with its own legacy of what the problems that we had running up to 2026. Well, I wanted to kind of bring now to a bit of a quick fire questions. These two questions kind of are quite definitive in probably how you're going to answer them, but I wanted to ask them. And so the first quick fire question is this one: what's one thing we should stop doing as an industry?
There are a lot of people that moan about things and it's always someone else's fault. I think ultimately we all have challenges, and sometimes you probably do just have to reflect a little bit on your own, what you're doing. So I think, that is not everything is down to external factors. Something is down to you, right? And in any business, I think you always have to look at yourself first and go, okay, what's going on here?
When you're trying to implement a new strategy, or whether it is like a sales promotion, where it is a long-term strategy for the business, you need to look at what is going to be the internal obstacles you're going to face, and kind of plan for them as well, not as well as the external factors that always need to be considered. Last quick fire question: what's one thing we should start doing?
Thinking about what you range in the shop. I think, start thinking about what that consumer would expect to see, should expect to see as well, in any retail environment. I think just really start thinking about what you buy. And, I think just by doing that and really, and just tidying up a little bit and clearing out that stuff that has sat there for a long time, just, get a bit more promotionally active. If it's not selling through, get it cleared, get the money freed up and put it into things that are selling, and just rethink your ranging and actually simplify your life. Basically, that's something I think that, and even within Madison, we've done that. We've dropped out of brands that just weren't really delivering and just said, what, nice people, like the products, but no one's wanting it. So stop. And I think it is, there's a degree of that. And, I think that will help a lot of people quite quickly, just those simple things, because that will reflect then in what goes on the walls and how it looks in the store. It will also simplify, all of their purchasing and lots of other things. So I think, and actually will help them build even better, stronger relationships with the suppliers that they do want to work with. So that, I think it's all those factors, it will solve quite a few things, I think, by doing that, rather than just, scattergun approach.
This kind of brilliant sum up so the opportunities that lie ahead in 2026. Just looking inwards, what can we address, and like specifically on a topic we've been discussing a lot, the bike shops, and what can be changed. And there is clear possibility, and if nothing else, is just looking at what other industries outside of the cycling industry are doing that is successful, and just try to adapt.
So they're in a good place, and potentially if they can sort some things out, I think they survived through the worst of all the internet challenges, and they came out the other end when those big internet companies didn't. So I think that says a lot, and I think now they've also leveled the playing. The access to running a good website themselves, is the barrier to that is a lot lower than it ever used to be. So shops, but they've managed to sort of level the playing field much better. So I think, we need shops to survive. It's so important to us. And and to any cyclist, it is really important. And I think, that's what we've got to focus on, making sure that they not only survive, but, flourish. And that's kind of what, our focus is.
Dom, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, and hope that people listening to this podcast, BikeBiz Podcast, can take a few nuggets of information, because it kind of will help them to see the bigger picture, see how to implement new things, and feel inspired as well. So thank you for your honesty and your insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening, and make sure to follow BikeBiz Podcast wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more people to find the show. And big thanks to our sponsor, Reed Bikes. We will see you on the next month for another episode of the BikeBiz Podcast. Thank you for listening.